The HR director slid the termination papers across the polished conference table, her expression practiced and cold. "We're eliminating your position," Jennifer said, presenting the severance terms with the same tone she might use to discuss cafeteria menu changes. I signed, my hand steady despite the 12 years of work crumbling beneath that pen stroke. 3 months later, a federal auditor named Diane opened the grant documentation binder at Westbrook Medical Research Institute, her eyes locked on one signature line under Principal Investigator. Her briefcase hit the floor with a crash that echoed through the silent room. I sat in my apartment 2 weeks after that meeting, staring at the severance agreement I had signed without really reading it. The shock was beginning to wear off, replaced by a hollow ache in my chest that wouldn't go away. 34 years old, and I had just lost the only career I had ever known. Westbrook Medical Research Institute had been my professional home for 12 years. I started there fresh out of graduate school with my master's degree in public health. Eager and idealistic, I believed in the mission. Medical research that helped people. Grants that funded studies to improve lives. I had coordinated 5 major NIH grants, totaling $18 million over those years. I knew every regulation, every reporting requirement, every deadline. I was good at my job. No, I was excellent at it. The severance was 6 months' salary, $48,000. It seemed like a lot that first day, sitting in the HR office with Jennifer explaining the terms in her clipped, professional voice. Position eliminated due to restructuring. Nothing personal. Standard package. Sign here, here, and here. I signed. I lived alone in a modest apartment in a suburban Connecticut town, about 40 minutes from the institute. No family nearby. My parents had retired to Arizona 3 years ago. I had work friends, but you know how that goes. When you spend 60 hours a week at a job, your coworkers become your social circle. I didn't really have anyone else, but I wasn't worried at first. 12 years of experience coordinating major federal research grants, I would find something quickly. I was sure of it. I spent the first week in sweatpants, eating ice cream and binge-watching television shows I had missed during all those late nights at the office, letting myself grieve. Then I updated my resume, polished my LinkedIn profile, and started applying. By the end of the second week, I had applied to 20 positions. Research coordinator roles, grant management positions, clinical trials administration. My qualifications were perfect. I had managed budgets in the millions, coordinated multi-year studies, liaised with NIH program officers. On paper, I was every hiring manager's dream candidate. The responses started coming in. Initial interest. Requests for phone screens. I felt that flutter of hope. See? This wouldn't be so bad. Then silence. After the preliminary conversations, after they said they would check my references, the communication stopped. Emails went unanswered. Recruiters who had seemed enthusiastic suddenly ghosted me. One after another, opportunities vanished. I didn't understand it. 3 weeks after my termination, I got a coffee with a recruiter named Patricia, who had reached out about a position at a hospital system in Hartford. We met at a cafe halfway between my apartment and her office. She was in her 50s, professional but with kind eyes that crinkled when she smiled. We talked about the role. It sounded perfect. She seemed impressed with my background. Then her expression shifted, became uncomfortable. "Something's wrong with your references," she said quietly, stirring her latte without looking at me. "What do you mean?" "I can't give you details. But when I called Westbrook to verify your employment, the conversation was unusual, cold." She finally met my eyes. "I've been doing this for 20 years. I know when someone is saying more than their words. Whatever happened there, it's following you." My stomach dropped. But I left on good terms. Position eliminated. They gave me severance. Patricia touched my hand briefly. "I believe you. but something is wrong. Be careful. I drove home in a daze, her words echoing in my head. That evening, I called Dr. Gerald Hutchinson, who had been my direct supervisor for 8 years. He was the program director, oversaw all the research grants I had coordinated. We had worked closely together. I thought we had a good relationship. The phone rang 4 times before he answered. Gerald, it's Evelyn. Evelyn Carson. A pause. Yes, Evelyn. What can I do for you? His voice was cold, formal. Nothing like the friendly tone he had used for years when we worked together. I'm job hunting, and I wanted to ask what you've been telling people who call for references. We're simply confirming dates of employment. Nothing more. Nothing more? Gerald, I worked with you for 8 years. I coordinated your grants. Don't I at least deserve to know what's being said about me? His voice hardened. I think it's best if we keep this professional, Evelyn. We confirm you worked here from 2013 to 2025. That's all. But why? What did I do? I have another call. Take care. He hung up. I sat on my couch, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. Something was very wrong. The next day, I met with Amy, a coworker who had been at Westbrook almost as long as I had. We had been work friends, sometimes grabbing lunch together, venting about deadlines and difficult investigators. She agreed to meet me at a coffee shop near her house, 20 minutes from the institute. When she walked in, she looked nervous. She glanced around the cafe like she expected someone to jump out from behind the pastry case. Thanks for meeting me, I said as she sat down. I can't stay long, she said, not making eye contact. Amy, what's going on? Why is everyone acting like I did something terrible? She leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a memo. Internal. After you left, management sent it to all department heads. It warned people against maintaining contact with you. What? Why? They're calling you a problem employee, saying you left under difficult circumstances. Her eyes finally met mine. Evelyn, they're making you sound like you did something wrong, like you were fired for cause. But I wasn't. Position eliminated. They gave me severance. I know. But that's not what they're implying internally. She grabbed her coffee cup, started to stand. I'm sorry. I have to go. If anyone finds out I talked to you, I could lose my job. Amy, please. I can't. I have a mortgage, kids in college. I'm sorry. She left. I sat alone at that table for an hour, watching people come and go, living their normal lives while mine fell apart in ways I didn't understand. That night, I opened LinkedIn to update my profile again. That's when I saw it. The recommendations section. I had 3 glowing recommendations from colleagues at Westbrook, including one from Dr. Pernew, 102, Hutchinson himself praising my attention to detail and grant management expertise. They were gone. Deleted. I checked my message requests, thinking maybe they had sent explanations. Nothing. They had systematically removed any public endorsement of my work. Why? 2 days later, I received a certified letter. I had to sign for it at the post office. The return address was from a law firm I didn't recognize, Brighton and Associates. I opened it in my car, hands shaking. 7 pages of legal letterhead. Dense paragraphs of threats dressed up in formal language. The letter referenced the confidentiality agreement buried in my severance package. It warned me against making disparaging statements about Westbrook Medical Research Institute. It stated that any interference with institute operations would result in legal action. It mentioned breach of contract, damages, court proceedings. I read it 3 times, trying to understand. I hadn't made any statements. I hadn't contacted anyone at Westbrook except Gerald, and that was just to ask about references. I hadn't posted anything online, hadn't badmouthed them to anyone. This letter was threatening me for things I hadn't done. Unless they were worried I might do something. Unless they were trying to scare me into silence before I even knew there was something to be silent about. I drove home, that letter on my passenger seat like a coiled snake, and for the first time since being fired, I felt something other than sadness. I felt afraid. 8 weeks had passed since Jennifer slid those papers across the table. 8 weeks. And I had burned through 2 months of severance. $48,000 had seemed like plenty of time to find a new job. I had applied to 67 positions now. Not one offer. Not even a second-round interview. The money was disappearing faster than I had calculated. Health insurance through Cobra cost $600 a month. My rent was $1,300. Car payment, $300. Student loans were in forbearance but would come due in 3 months. Utilities, groceries, gas. I had never paid such close attention to every dollar before. I did the math one night, spreadsheet glowing in the dark apartment. 4 months. That's how long I could last before I ran out of money completely. 4 months until eviction, until my car was repossessed, until I had nothing. Panic became my constant companion. I had to do something. Pride didn't pay rent. So I applied for temp positions. Anything to bring in some income while I kept searching for real work. A staffing agency placed me as a medical receptionist at a clinic in New Haven. $14 an hour. After taxes, barely $2,000 a month. I sat behind that reception desk, answering phones and checking in patients, and tried not to think about how I used to manage million-dollar research grants. Tried not to calculate how my previous salary of $65,000 a year had been reduced to under $25,000. Tried not to see the pity in people's eyes when I told them I had a master's degree. Nobody at the clinic knew about Westbrook. I didn't tell them. The shame was too heavy. At 10 weeks, I filed for unemployment benefits. The state website made it seem simple enough. I had been terminated. Position eliminated. I should qualify. Westbrook contested it. The letter arrived from the Connecticut Department of Labor, informing me of a hearing. Westbrook claimed I had been terminated for cause due to performance issues. My former employer had a right to contest my benefits. I stared at that letter, my hands trembling. Performance issues? My severance agreement said position eliminated. That was the whole reason for the package. For the payout. For the clean break. Now they were claiming I had been fired for poor performance? The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Conducted over video conference. I sat in my apartment with my laptop, wearing a blazer over my pajama pants, trying to look professional, while my stomach churned. The unemployment judge was a tired-looking woman named Susan who had probably heard 1,000 of these cases. She reviewed the file without much expression. "Miss Carson, your former employer has submitted documentation indicating you received multiple performance warnings during your final year of employment. Can you respond to these allegations?" "I never received any performance warnings. I have all my performance reviews. They're excellent, every single one." I pulled up the PDFs on my screen, showing them to the camera. 5-star ratings. Comments praising my organizational skills, my attention to detail, my ability to manage complex grants. "Miss Carson, Westbrook has provided written warnings dated within the last year. 3 separate documents, all signed by Dr. Gerald Hutchinson, your supervisor." "That's impossible. I never saw those documents. He never warned me about anything." The judge looked at something off screen. "The documents appear to have your signature acknowledging receipt." "What? No, I never signed anything like that." She shared her screen. There they were. 3 warnings about missed deadlines, about errors in grant reporting, about unprofessional conduct with colleagues. Each one dated, each one with Gerald's signature. And at the bottom, a scanned signature that looked like mine. I felt the room spin. Those were forgeries. They had to be. I had never seen those documents before in my life. "Miss Carson, Do you have any evidence disputing these warnings? Just my word. And my performance reviews. The judge's expression told me everything. Documentation beat testimony. Signatures beat denial. I was just another disgruntled ex-employee claiming unfair treatment. After reviewing the evidence, I'm ruling in favor of the employer. Miss Carson was terminated for cause, based on documented performance issues. Unemployment benefits are denied. The video call ended. I sat in the silence of my apartment, that rejection echoing in my head. They had created false documentation, backdated warnings I had never received, forged my signature, built a paper trail of lies, and it had worked. I was denied the benefits that might have kept me afloat. My name was systematically being destroyed, and I couldn't prove any of it was a lie. That night, I came home from my receptionist job to find a notice taped to my apartment door, 3-day eviction warning. I was behind on rent. Not much, just 1 month. But my landlord wasn't interested in my story. Pay or leave. I sat on the floor of my living room, back against the couch, and opened my laptop. Typed bankruptcy attorney into the search bar. Stared at the results through tears. This was my life now. 34 years old with a master's degree. And I was about to lose my apartment. The Google search results filled my screen. But there was something else, too. A news article in the sidebar. Recommended based on my location. Westbrook Medical Research Institute receives record $23 million NIH grant. I clicked on it before I could stop myself. Some instinct. Some need to torture myself by seeing what my former workplace was doing while I fell apart. The article was dated 2 weeks ago. It featured a photo of Dr. Gerald Hutchinson shaking hands with someone in a suit, both of them smiling. Behind them, a banner with the NIH logo and Westbrook's name. The text detailed a major new grant for pediatric diabetes research. $23 million over 5 years. The largest single grant Westbrook had ever received. Dr. Hutchinson was quoted extensively as the principal investigator, discussing the groundbreaking research protocols they would implement. I read the description of the research program, the methodology, the patient recruitment strategy, the data collection protocols. My vision blurred. I knew this grant. I knew it because I had written it, not helped with it, not assisted. Written it. Every word of that application I had crafted over 3 years. I had developed the research protocols. I had coordinated with NIH program officers for 2 years leading up to submission. I had built the budget. I had designed the recruitment strategy. I had created the timeline. I scrolled down to the list of personnel on the grant. There was Gerald, listed as principal investigator. Below him, the co-investigators, the research staff, the data analysts. My name wasn't there. Nowhere in the entire article did my name appear. They had taken the grant I built, the work I had done for 3 years, removed me completely, and were now receiving $23 million in federal funding for it. I opened my personal email archive, the one I maintained separately from work. Searched for emails about the pediatric diabetes grant. Found dozens, hundreds, messages to NIH, to consultants, to potential collaborating institutions. Draft after draft of the application. Meeting notes, timeline spreadsheets, budget calculations, all sent from my email address, all created by me. I pulled up the original grant application, the one I had kept a copy of when we submitted it 3 years ago. There, on the signature page, was my title, Co-Principal Investigator. Not support staff, not research coordinator, co-principal investigator. That meant I had legal responsibility for the grant. Under federal regulations, principal investigators are accountable for grant compliance, for accurate reporting, for ethical conduct of research. My signature on that line meant I was as responsible as Gerald for everything that happened on that grant. They had erased me from the current team, but my name was still on the original application. That signature was permanent, filed with NIH, part of the federal record. NIH, and suddenly, I understood. They hadn't just fired me. They hadn't just stolen credit for my work. They had removed me from the project before something else happened. Something they didn't want me to know about. I sat there on my living room floor, eviction notice beside me, employment prospects destroyed, money running out, and realized that this wasn't just about a job. This was so much bigger than I had imagined. And I had no idea what to do about it. 10 weeks after my termination, I made a decision. I wouldn't be silent anymore. Whatever Westbrook was hiding, whatever reason they had for destroying my reputation and erasing me from the work I had built, I was going to expose it. I spent an entire weekend researching federal grant fraud. I learned about the NIH Office of Research Integrity, about their hotline for reporting misconduct, about protections for whistleblowers. I gathered every piece of evidence I had saved. Old emails showing my work on the grant, draft documents with my name, meeting notes where I had coordinated with NIH, the original grant application with my signature as co-principal investigator. Monday morning, I called the hotline. My hands shook as I dialed. A man answered, professional and calm. Office of Research Integrity. This is Stephen. I took a breath. My name is Evelyn Carson. I need to report possible grant fraud at Westbrook Medical Research Institute in Connecticut. He listened as I explained everything. The pediatric diabetes grant I had developed. My sudden termination. My name being removed from all documentation. The $23 million they were now receiving for work I had built. He took notes, asked questions, maintained that neutral government employee tone throughout. Miss Carson, this is a serious allegation. Can you provide documentation? Yes. I have emails, drafts, the original application, everything. Please send those to the email address I'm about to give you. We'll review them and determine next steps. I hung up feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. 2 days later, I sent him everything. Organized chronologically. Clearly labeled. Professional and thorough. The way I used to prepare grant documents. I waited. On Thursday afternoon, while I was working my receptionist shift, a FedEx delivery arrived at my apartment. My neighbor signed for it and texted me a photo. The return address was a law firm, Brighton and Associates. I left work early, claiming illness. Drove home with my heart pounding. Retrieved the package from my neighbor with trembling hands. Inside was a formal cease and desist letter. 7 pages of legal threats printed on heavy paper that probably cost more per sheet than I made in an hour. The letter accused me of violating my confidentiality agreement, my non-disparagement clause, and intellectual property provisions of my employment. It stated clearly that I had no ownership of grant applications, as all work product belonged to Westbrook under work-for-hire provisions. It demanded I retract false statements made to federal agencies. It threatened a lawsuit for damages exceeding $100,000 if I did not comply within 48 hours. I read it 3 times, each time feeling sicker. How did they know? I had only contacted the NIH hotline 2 days ago. How could they possibly know already? The answer was obvious. Someone at NIH had contacted Westbrook. Standard procedure. Probably, before launching an investigation. They would reach out to the institution, give them a chance to respond. And Westbrook had responded by sending lawyers after me. I needed help. I couldn't fight this alone. I searched online for employment attorneys, found one offering free consultations. Barbara was in her 60s, with 30 years of experience in employment law. Her office was in a strip mall, cluttered with case files and coffee mugs. She read the cease and desist while I sat across from her desk, picking at my cuticles. Finally, she looked up. This is well drafted. Brighton and Associates are expensive. Top firm. Can they actually sue me? Let me see your severance agreement. I handed over the packet I had signed that day in the HR office, the one I hadn't read carefully because I was too shocked. Barbara read through it, her expression growing more serious. Miss Carson, this agreement is airtight. You signed away your rights to claim credit for any work product created during your employment. The non-disparagement clause is enforceable. If they sue and win, you would be liable for their legal fees, plus damages. But I didn't disparage them. I reported fraud to the NIH. You made allegations about an institution to a federal agency. They're arguing that's disparagement. She set the papers down. Can you afford to defend yourself in court? No. Then you need to stop. Whatever you think they did, you can't prove it without resources. And they have unlimited resources. She leaned back in her chair. My honest advice? Walk away. Start over somewhere else. Don't let this destroy your life. It's already destroying my life. Then don't let them finish the job. I left her office feeling hollowed out. Drove home in silence. Sat in my apartment as the sun set, wondering if she was right. Maybe I should just give up. Move to another state. Change careers. Pretend these 12 years never happened. That evening, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Miss Carson? This is Stephen from the Office of Research Integrity. Yes? His voice had changed from our first call. Colder. Formal. I'm calling to inform you that we've completed our preliminary review of your allegations regarding Westbrook Medical Research Institute. Already? It had only been 2 days. The institution has been very cooperative. They've provided documentation demonstrating that Dr. Gerald Hutchinson was the principal investigator from the grant's inception. You were listed as support staff, not a research lead. The claims in your complaint are demonstrably false. That's not true. I was listed as co-principal investigator. I have the original application. Miss Carson, I need to inform you that making false reports to federal agencies is a crime. If you persist in these allegations, you could face charges. The room tilted. What? I strongly suggest you consider your next steps carefully. If you believe you have legitimate concerns, I recommend addressing them through proper legal channels. But further contact with this office regarding these claims would not be advisable. He hung up. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. They had turned it around. Completely. Now, I was the one being threatened with criminal charges. Not for exposing fraud, but for making false accusations. Westbrook hadn't just defended themselves. They had weaponized the system against me. If I kept fighting, I faced lawsuits from their lawyers and potential criminal prosecution from the federal government. If I stayed silent, they won. They got away with whatever they had done, collected their $23 million, and I was left with nothing. Either way, I was trapped. My landlord called the next day about the eviction. Court date was set for 2 weeks out. I needed to pay 3 months' rent immediately, or I was out. I didn't have it. I started packing. 12 weeks after my termination, I moved out of my apartment. Not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't afford the legal fight of an eviction on my record. I packed my belongings into a storage unit and moved into an extended stay motel on the edge of town. $200 a week, paid in cash, for a room with a bed, a microwave, and a view of the highway. I still had the receptionist job, but it wasn't enough. After taxes, I cleared about $1,700 a month. The motel alone was $800. I ate ramen and skipped meals, stopped buying coffee, canceled my phone's data plan and relied on free Wi-Fi, watched my bank account dwindle toward zero. My car was repossessed on a Tuesday morning. I came out of the motel to go to work, and it was gone. I had missed 3 payments. The finance company was done waiting. I took the bus after that. 2 hours each way to get to the clinic in New Haven. 4 hours a day on public transit, watching my life become smaller and smaller. At night, in that motel room with the flickering light and thin walls, I cried. Silent tears that I pressed into my pillow so the people in the next rooms wouldn't hear. I thought about giving up completely, just disappearing, moving across the country, starting over with a new name and a new story where Westbrook didn't exist. But I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jennifer sliding those papers across the table, Gerald's cold voice on the phone, the federal investigator threatening me, the lawyers, the eviction notice, the repossession, every humiliation, every loss, playing on repeat. At 3 in the morning on a Thursday, I gave up on sleep, opened my laptop, connected to the motel's spotty Wi-Fi, and started scrolling through my old work files. I don't know what I was looking for. Maybe just torture. A reminder of what I used to have, what I used to be. I opened the folder with grant documents, found the pediatric diabetes grant application, the final version we had submitted to NIH 3 years ago. And I actually read it. Not skimmed it, not searched for my name, but read every page like I was seeing it for the first time. There, on the signature page. My name, my title, Principal Investigator. My signature, my date, not support staff, Co-PI. That meant legal responsibility, accountability for every aspect of the research. I kept reading. Clicked through the progress reports we had submitted to NIH over the past 3 years. These were reports I had coordinated, but didn't always write. Gerald and the other investigators provided the content. I compiled it, formatted it, submitted it. Opened the Year 2 progress report. Submitted 18 months ago. The patient enrollment section claimed we had recruited 300 patients for the study. I stared at that number. Something about it felt wrong. I searched my backup files for my enrollment tracking spreadsheet. Found it. Opened it. Year 2 enrollment. 172 patients. Not 300. 172. I checked the math 3 times. Looked at the dates. No mistake. The progress report we submitted to NIH had inflated enrollment by 75%. My hands started shaking. I opened the Year 3 preliminary report. The one submitted just 1 month before I was fired. Claimed enrollment. 400 patients. I checked my spreadsheet. Actual enrollment. 215. The numbers were completely fabricated. This wasn't a rounding error. This wasn't a typo. Someone had deliberately falsified patient enrollment data in reports to the National Institutes of Health, and my signature was on the original grant application as co-principal investigator. If NIH discovered this fraud, I would be held responsible. Federal regulations don't care if you actually falsified the data. If your name is on the grant as PI, you're accountable. I could be debarred from federal research for life, face criminal charges, go to prison. They had fired me right after submitting that false Year 3 report. Removed me from the team. If the fraud was ever discovered, I was the perfect scapegoat. The ex-employee who had been terminated for performance issues. The one with documented warnings in her file. The one who wasn't there anymore to defend herself. I searched frantically through my emails. Found the draft of the Year 2 progress report I had prepared. Pulled it up. My draft showed 172 patients. Accurate numbers. I sent it to Gerald for review and approval. Found his response email. These numbers are too low. We need to show stronger recruitment to maintain funding. Please adjust the figures accordingly. I scrolled through the rest of the email chain. My response: I can't adjust factual data. We should discuss realistic projections for Year 3 to get back on track. His reply: I'll handle the final report. Thanks. 2 weeks later, the progress report was submitted to NIH. with enrollment numbers I never approved, that I had specifically refused to falsify, but I had no proof I objected. It was a verbal conversation in his office. Nothing in writing except that one email where he told me he would handle it, and I had assumed handle it meant he would talk to the team about improving recruitment, not that he would just lie. I sat on that motel room bed, laptop glowing in the dark, and understood the full scope of what had happened. Gerald had been falsifying grant data for years, probably embezzling funds, claiming expenses for patients who didn't exist, inflating budgets based on fake enrollment numbers. And he had made sure my signature was on the grant as co-PI, so if it was ever discovered, I would go down with him. Then he fired me, destroyed my reputation, made sure I couldn't get another job in research, blacklisted me so thoroughly that if I ever tried to speak up, no one would believe me. I was the insurance policy, the fall guy, the expendable employee who could be sacrificed to protect the real criminals. My phone buzzed. A notification. I almost ignored it, but something made me check. An alert I had set up months ago when job hunting. New positions matching my search criteria. I opened it without thinking. Force of habit. Research Integrity Officer. Boston Children's Hospital. I read the description numbly, then started laughing. Bitter, exhausted laughter that probably sounded unhinged. A job investigating research misconduct. Perfect. Maybe I should apply. Tell them about my extensive experience being framed for fraud. But the laughter died in my throat. I had to report this. Again. Properly this time. With all the evidence. The falsified reports. The enrollment discrepancies. The email where Gerald told me to adjust the figures. But if I did, the federal investigation would look at everyone involved, including me, the co-principal investigator who coordinated those reports, who signed the original application accepting responsibility. Even if I proved Gerald falsified the data, I would still face questions. Why didn't you catch it sooner? Why didn't you report it immediately? You coordinated these reports. Your signature is on the grant. I was trapped again. If I stayed silent, I was complicit. If I spoke up, I looked guilty. The next morning, I called the NIH hotline again. Got a different investigator this time. A woman named Monica. I explained everything. The false enrollment numbers, the specific reports, the dates, the discrepancies in my records. She took it seriously. Said she would forward it to the appropriate office. Asked for my documentation. Then she asked, "Were you aware of these discrepancies while you were employed at Westbrook?" I only discovered them after I was fired. When I reviewed the files, "But you coordinated these reports?" "Yes." "And you were listed as co-principal investigator on the grant application?" "Yes, but I didn't falsify anything." Her voice remained neutral. "Do you have documentation proving you objected to the false reporting?" "An email. One email where Dr. Hutchinson told me to adjust figures and I refused." "Just one?" "I was in his office when I told him I wouldn't falsify data. That conversation wasn't in writing." She was silent for a moment. "Miss Carson, I'll make sure this information reaches the right people. But I need to tell you honestly. If there's an investigation, you'll be questioned as well. Your signature on that application makes you legally responsible for grant compliance." "I understand." I hung up feeling sicker than before. 2 days later, there was a knock on my motel room door. I opened it to find 2 people in suits holding federal credentials. Office of Inspector General. They needed to ask me some questions. Could I come with them to their office? I wasn't under arrest, but it was strongly encouraged that I cooperate. I went. The interrogation took place in a beige conference room in a federal building in Hartford. 2 agents, Dorothy and Frank, coffee in styrofoam cups, recording equipment on the table. They laid out the timeline, showed me the grant application with my signature, showed me the progress reports with the false data, asked if I recognized them. "Yes, Miss Carson." Were you aware these progress reports contained false patient enrollment data? Not at the time. I discovered it recently when reviewing my files after being terminated. But you coordinated these reports? I compiled them. The investigators provided the data. I formatted and submitted them. You didn't verify the data was accurate? I trusted the investigators were reporting accurately. Frank leaned forward. Miss Carson, you signed this grant application as co-principal investigator. That's not a clerical position. That's a leadership position with legal responsibility for ensuring data accuracy. I know. Then why didn't you catch these discrepancies? Because I wasn't looking for fraud. I trusted my colleagues. Dorothy opened a file. We've been speaking with your former colleagues at Westbrook. Several have suggested you were overly ambitious, that you might have inflated enrollment numbers to make the program look more successful. To secure additional funding, that's not true. They say you were terminated for performance issues. Unreliable reporting, that's a lie. They fired me, and then created false documentation to justify it. The agents exchanged glances. Miss Carson, do you have any evidence you weren't involved in falsifying these reports? My spreadsheets show accurate enrollment numbers. The false numbers only appear in the final reports submitted to NIH. Couldn't you have created those spreadsheets after the fact? To cover yourself? Why would I do that? You were just fired. Bitter. Angry. Wanting to shift blame. I wasn't fired when those reports were submitted. I was still employed. Why would I falsify data and then keep accurate records proving it was false? They didn't have an answer for that. But I could see they didn't believe me either. The interrogation lasted 3 hours. By the end, I understood. I wasn't a witness. I was a suspect. Westbrook had successfully convinced federal investigators that I was the one who committed fraud, and I had no way to prove otherwise. 13 weeks after my termination, I received official notification. I was under investigation by the Office of Inspector General for federal grant fraud, specifically making false statements on progress reports submitted to the National Institutes of Health. Potential charges included wire fraud, theft of government property, and conspiracy. Each charge carried up to 5 years in federal prison. The notification letter instructed me not to leave the state of Connecticut. I was a target of the investigation, not a witness. Westbrook, meanwhile, had issued a public statement expressing shock and dismay at learning about potential misconduct by a former employee. They were cooperating fully with federal investigators. Their compliance officer was quoted in the local news, saying they had discovered irregularities after my departure and immediately reported them to the NIH. They were painting themselves as the victims, and me as the criminal. I needed a lawyer immediately, but I had $700 in my bank account. Criminal defense attorneys wanted retainers of $50,000 or more. I didn't qualify for a public defender unless I was actually charged. I applied anyway, hoping they would assign someone early. The system moved slowly, but eventually a public defender named Carl was assigned to my case. He met me at the federal courthouse, a tired-looking man in his 40s with coffee stains on his tie. "This is serious," he said, flipping through the evidence the prosecution had provided. Multiple years of false reporting. Your signature on the grant application. Pattern of misconduct. They have a strong case. I didn't do it. He looked at me with the kind of skepticism that comes from representing too many guilty clients who claimed innocence. Miss Carson, the evidence is substantial. Emails from your account requesting data adjustments. Performance warnings about unreliable reporting. Your colleagues all confirming you coordinated these grants. The prosecution isn't going to offer a better deal than what you'll get now. What are you talking about? A plea bargain. It's your best option. I didn't commit fraud. He sighed, closed the folder. I'll present whatever defense you want, but you should understand your odds at trial are poor. I left that meeting feeling more alone than ever. Even my own lawyer thought I was guilty. The federal agents continued their investigation. They interviewed everyone I had ever worked with at Westbrook. Former colleagues, supervisors, administrative staff, and every single person, trying to protect their own jobs and reputations, confirmed whatever narrative the institution fed them. Evelyn was ambitious. Evelyn was under pressure to show results. Evelyn might have cut corners. Evelyn was terminated for performance issues. Nobody mentioned that I had been there 12 years with excellent reviews. Nobody mentioned that those performance warnings appeared only after I was fired. Nobody risked their careers to tell the truth. 2 weeks into the investigation, I got another call from Carl. The prosecutors want to meet. Assistant U.S. Attorney Helen Martinez. She's willing to discuss a plea agreement. We met in a conference room at the U.S. Attorney's office. Helen was in her 50s, sharp-eyed and professional. She laid out the case against me with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times. 3 years of fraudulent progress reports. Nearly $2 million in federal grant funds obtained under false pretenses. Your signature as co-principal investigator establishes legal responsibility. We have emails from your account directing alterations to enrollment data. We have testimony from multiple colleagues. If this goes to trial, Miss Carson, the jury will convict and will seek the maximum sentence. I didn't write those emails. Someone accessed my account after I was fired and created them. She didn't even blink. Can you prove that? No. Then it's your word against documentation. She slid a paper across the table. We're prepared to offer a plea deal. You plead guilty to 1 count of making false statements to a federal agency. You cooperate fully, testify against other involved parties. We recommend a sentence of 18 months in federal prison, followed by probation. You'll also owe restitution. Amount to be determined. 18 months in prison for something I didn't do. If you reject this offer and go to trial, you're facing 5 years on multiple counts. She leaned forward. Take the deal, Miss Carson. It's the best you're going to get. I have 72 hours to decide, Carl said as we left. That evening, another news story appeared online. This one in the Hartford Courant. Former Westbrook employee under federal investigation for research fraud. They didn't name me directly, but the description was detailed enough. Research coordinator, 12 years at the Institute. Terminated earlier this year. Now under investigation for falsifying patient data on a pediatric diabetes study. Within hours, my name was attached to it on social media. Someone from Westbrook must have leaked it. My LinkedIn was flooded with messages. Former colleagues distancing themselves. Recruiters canceling interviews I hadn't even scheduled yet. The few friends I had left sending concerned texts. Amy, who had warned me weeks ago in that coffee shop, sent one message. I can't be associated with you anymore. I have a family. I'm sorry. The receptionist job I had been working called. The clinic manager was apologetic but firm. We're going to have to let you go. Given the allegations, we can't have you working with patients. I lost my job. Again. I sat in that motel room that night, looking at the plea agreement Carl had given me. 18 months in federal prison. A felony conviction. My career destroyed permanently. My reputation gone. My life over. But at least I wouldn't face 5 years at trial. I picked up a pen, started to sign, then stopped. Something gnawed at me. A thought I couldn't quite form. A detail I was missing. I put the plea agreement down. Opened my laptop. Started going through my files again. Every email, every document, every spreadsheet. If I was going to prison anyway, I wanted to know what I had missed, what I could have done differently. I organized everything chronologically. Created a master spreadsheet of every grant milestone, every report submission, every significant event over 3 years. Then I cross-referenced it with my personal calendar. I had always kept meticulous records of my schedule. Meetings, conferences, travel, everything. Year, 2. Progress report. The first one with falsified data. Submitted April 15th. 3 years ago. I checked my calendar for that week. I was in Seattle. NIH had sponsored a training conference for grant coordinators. I had attended the entire week, April 13th through 19th. 700 people there. Fully documented. Hotel reservations. Flight records. Conference registration. I physically could not have prepared or submitted that report. I wasn't even in Connecticut. My heart started pounding. Year 3 report. The second fraudulent one. Submitted February 3rd. I checked my calendar. My mother had emergency surgery in Florida. Complications from a routine procedure. I flew down immediately. Stayed with her for 10 days while she recovered. January 30th through February 10th. Again, I wasn't in Connecticut. Couldn't have submitted the report. I kept digging. Found the draft reports I had actually prepared. Both of them. Saved in my backup files with metadata showing creation dates. My versions had accurate enrollment numbers. They were dated weeks before the submission deadlines. Someone had taken my drafts, revised them with false data, and resubmitted them. The fabricated emails in my account. The ones where I supposedly requested data adjustments. I checked the timestamps. Most were sent between 2 and 4 in the morning. I pulled up my building security logs. I had kept copies because I used to claim parking expenses. The logs showed badge entries and exits. I was never in the office building during those overnight hours. Not once. Someone had accessed my email account remotely. Created messages. Backdated them. Built a false paper trail, and I could prove it. I had third-party documentation for everything. Conference attendance verified by NIH. Hospital records from my mother's surgery. Flight confirmations. Hotel records. Security logs from the office building. This wasn't just my word anymore. This was evidence. I called Carl immediately. It was after midnight, but I didn't care. I have proof I didn't commit these crimes. He sounded groggy. Miss Carson, it's late. I wasn't in Connecticut when those fraudulent reports were submitted. I was at a conference in Seattle for one. In Florida with my sick mother for the other. I have documentation. Flight records, hotel receipts, hospital records. And the fabricated emails from my account were sent at times when building security logs prove I wasn't in the office. Silence. Carl, this is proof. Real proof. Not just my word. He sighed. This is circumstantial. It doesn't overcome the emails and testimony. But I wasn't physically present. How could I have submitted those reports? You could have submitted them remotely before traveling. I have the drafts I created. They're dated weeks before submission and have accurate data. Someone revised my work after I left. His tone remained dismissive. Bring everything to my office tomorrow. But Miss Carson, I'm telling you honestly, I think you should take the plea deal. 18 months is a gift compared to what you'll face at trial. I hung up. Even my own lawyer, seeing evidence of my innocence, advised me to plead guilty. Because fighting the case was too much work. Because public defenders were overloaded. Because plea deals closed cases quickly and efficiently. He didn't believe me. He didn't want to believe me. I was completely alone. I sat in that motel room. My evidence spread across the bed. And realized something. If I took that plea deal, Westbrook won. Gerald won. They got away with fraud. They kept their $23 million. They destroyed my life and faced no consequences. And I went to prison for crimes they committed. I couldn't do it, even if it meant facing trial. Even if it meant 5 years instead of 18 months. Even if I lost everything, I couldn't plead guilty to fraud I didn't commit. I would fight. With or without Carl. With or without anyone believing me. Because the truth mattered. Even if I was the only person who knew it. 14 weeks after my termination, I called the prosecutor directly. Helen Martinez picked up after 2 rings. Miss Carson, have you made a decision about the plea offer? I'm not signing it. I have evidence proving I didn't commit these crimes. I need to meet with you. There was a pause. Miss Carson, your attorney has advised you to accept this deal. My attorney hasn't looked at the evidence I found. Give me 2 hours. If you still think I'm guilty after seeing what I have, I'll sign. Another pause. Fine. This afternoon, 2 o'clock. Bring everything. I spent the morning organizing. Printed documents. Created a timeline. Put everything in a binder with tabs and labels. I used to prepare grant applications for federal agencies. I knew how to present complex information clearly. The federal building was downtown Hartford. I took 3 buses to get there, arriving 30 minutes early. Waited in the lobby, binder clutched to my chest like armor. Carl met me outside the conference room, looking unhappy. This is a mistake. You should take the deal. Then you can leave. I'll present this myself. He followed me in anyway. Helen was there with FBI agent Dorothy, the one who had interrogated me. They sat across the table, expressions skeptical. I opened my binder. You have 2 hours, Helen said. I started with the timeline. Showed them every grant milestone, every report submission over 3 years. Then I pulled out my personal calendar. Year 2 progress report. Submitted April 15th. I was in Seattle that entire week, at an NIH training conference. I showed them my conference registration, flight confirmations, hotel receipts, the conference program with my name listed as an attendee. I couldn't have prepared or submitted that report. I wasn't in Connecticut. Helen studied the documents. Dorothy leaned over to look. I continued. Year 3 report. Submitted February 3rd. My mother had emergency surgery in Florida. I showed them hospital records with my name listed as her emergency contact. Visiting logs, flight records, hotel receipts from Jacksonville. I was there January 30th through February 10th. Again, I couldn't have submitted that report. You could have submitted them remotely before traveling, Helen said. I pulled out printed copies of my original drafts. These are the reports I actually prepared. Look at the metadata. Creation dates are weeks before submission deadlines, and they contain accurate enrollment numbers. The falsified versions were created after my drafts. Someone revised my work and resubmitted. I laid out my enrollment tracking spreadsheets, cross-referenced them with the dates. Then I pulled out the fabricated emails, the ones supposedly from my account requesting data adjustments. These were sent between 2 and 4 in the morning. I showed them my office building security logs. Here are my badge entries and exits for the entire year. I was never in the building during overnight hours. Not once. Someone accessed my email account remotely, created these messages, backdated them. Helen and Dorothy exchanged looks. Miss Carson, why didn't you present this earlier? Helen's voice was sharper now, more focused. My public defender didn't take it seriously. I organized this myself. Last night, Dorothy leaned forward. If you didn't falsify the reports, who did? Dr. Gerald Hutchinson. He had complete access to my accounts. He approved all grant submissions. I showed them the email chain where Gerald told me to adjust enrollment figures, and I refused. He said he would handle the final report. That's when the false data was inserted. Can you prove he accessed your account? IT logs would show it. If they still exist. Helen pulled out her phone, made a call, spoke quietly to someone. Hung up. We can subpoena IT records. She looked at Dorothy. We need to re-examine Westbrook's cooperation. They've been directing this investigation toward Miss Carson, but they haven't provided IT logs, personnel files, or internal communications. Only documents implicating her. Dorothy nodded. If her timeline is accurate, we've been looking at the wrong target. Helen turned back to me. Miss Carson, I'm suspending the plea offer. You're no longer the primary target of this investigation. But we need your full cooperation. Everything you know about how grants were managed at Westbrook. I've wanted to cooperate from the beginning." She slid a legal pad across the table. "Start writing." I spent the next 4 hours detailing everything. How grants were submitted, who had access to accounts, how reports were prepared, Gerald's pressure to show better results, the culture of chasing funding over accuracy. The next day, FBI agents executed a search warrant at Westbrook. Showed up at 7 in the morning with boxes and computer forensics equipment. Seized servers, individual computers, file cabinets. Employees were escorted out while agents worked. Gerald and the executive director both hired lawyers immediately. Over the next 2 weeks, FBI digital forensics tore apart Westbrook's IT systems. And they found everything. Remote access logs showing Gerald's administrative credentials accessing my email account. Multiple times after my termination. Creating messages, backdating them, building the false paper trail. Deleted emails they recovered showed conversations between Gerald and the executive director discussing how to handle the enrollment shortfall, how to inflate numbers without getting caught, how to fire me before the next audit. Financial records showed the real scope of the fraud. Inflated patient enrollment numbers had justified increased budget requests to NIH. That additional funding went to executive bonuses. Gerald had received over $300,000 in bonuses over 3 years, justified by successful grant management, luxury conference travel, 5-star hotels, first-class flights, restaurants with 4-figure bills, equipment purchases that were funneled to a private consulting company owned by Gerald. This wasn't just false reporting, it was embezzlement. Systematic theft of federal grant money, and it went deeper. FBI expanded the investigation to other grants Westbrook managed. Found similar patterns across multiple NIH grants over 8 years. False enrollment data, inflated budgets, misappropriated funds, potentially $12 million in fraud. They also found evidence of the systematic firing of employees. 3 other researchers terminated over 2 years. All had worked on federal grants. All left suddenly before audits. Internal emails discussed using terminated employees as potential scapegoats if fraud was discovered. I was supposed to be the next one. Helen called me 3 weeks after I presented my evidence. "We're filing charges. Dr. Gerald Hutchinson, Executive Director Thomas Brennan, and CFO Laura Phillips. Wire fraud, false statements, theft of government property, conspiracy, each facing up to 20 years. And me? You're a witness, not a defendant. We'll need your testimony. But Miss Carson, I owe you an apology. We almost got this completely wrong." 3 days later, federal agents arrested Gerald at his home in suburban Hartford. Also arrested Thomas and Laura. All 3 were perp-walked out of their houses in handcuffs, cameras catching every moment for the evening news. The story exploded. Massive research fraud scandal at Connecticut Medical Institute. Federal agents arrest 3 executives. $43 million in grant funding suspended. NIH froze every grant Westbrook managed pending investigation. Without that funding, the institute couldn't operate. Within a week, they announced temporary closure. 160 employees laid off. Patients transferred to other facilities. The building locked and dark. The institution that had destroyed me was imploding. I watched the news coverage from my motel room, feeling a complicated mix of vindication and grief. Yes, they were being held accountable, but I had lost a year of my life. My savings, my apartment, my car, my career, my reputation. Nothing would give that back. The trial was set for 6 months later. In the interim, I became the government's star witness. I met with prosecutors dozens of times. Walked them through every document, every email, every falsified report. My meticulous records became the foundation of their case. Helen told me repeatedly, "Your documentation is damning. You kept evidence they thought was destroyed." A reporter from the Hartford Courant called for an interview. Former employee exposes massive research fraud. I almost said no. The attention felt overwhelming. But then I thought about other people who might be in my situation. Fired employees being used as scapegoats. People who thought they were powerless. I did the interview. The article ran 2 weeks later. Front page. My photo. My story. Everything that had happened from that meeting with Jennifer. Through the federal investigation. The response was overwhelming. Other former Westbrook employees reached out. People from other institutions who had experienced similar retaliation. Researchers who wanted to know how to protect themselves from fraud accusations. I became an accidental advocate. Someone who survived being framed and fought back. It didn't erase what I had lost, but it gave the nightmare meaning. 6 months after my termination, I stood in federal court and testified. The courtroom was packed. Media in the gallery. Westbrook employees who still had jobs. Former colleagues. People whose lives had been affected by the fraud. I took the oath. Sat in the witness box. And for 3 days, I walked the jury through everything. I explained how grants worked. How principal investigators had legal responsibility for accurate reporting. How I had coordinated the pediatric diabetes grant for 3 years. Developing the research protocols. Building relationships with NIH. Creating the infrastructure. I showed them the falsified progress reports. Pointed out the inflated enrollment numbers. Cross-referenced them with my accurate tracking spreadsheets. I walked them through my timeline. Showed my calendar proving I was in Seattle when the first false report was submitted. In Florida when the second was submitted. The hotel records. Flight confirmations. Conference registration. Hospital logs. I explained how I discovered the fraud only after being fired. How I tried to report it and was threatened with lawsuits. How fabricated emails were created in my account after my termination to frame me. The defense attorneys tried to shake me. Suggested I was a disgruntled employee seeking revenge. Implied I had created the evidence after the fact to cover my own misconduct. But they couldn't overcome the documentation. Third-party records verifying my timeline. Metadata proving when documents were created. IT logs showing remote access to my accounts. My testimony was unshakable because it was true. And I had kept records of everything. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Guilty. All counts. Dr. Gerald Hutchinson. Guilty. Executive Director Thomas Brennan. Guilty. CFO Laura Phillips. Guilty on 11 of 13 counts. The courtroom erupted in noise. Media rushing to file stories. Family members crying. I sat quietly in the gallery. Tears running down my face. Not tears of joy, just exhausted. Overwhelming relief. Sentencing came 6 weeks later. Gerald received 12 years in federal prison and $3 million in restitution. The judge called his conduct a profound betrayal of public trust. You stole money, intended to help sick children. You destroyed careers to cover your crimes. The damage you've caused is immeasurable. Thomas got 10 years and $2.5 million in restitution. Laura got 7 years and $1 million. All 3 were permanently debarred from receiving federal research funding. Their careers in medical research were over. After sentencing, Helen found me in the hallway outside the courtroom. You did this, she said. Without your evidence, we never would have known the full scope. I just didn't want to go to prison for something I didn't do. You did more than that. You exposed systematic fraud, recovered millions in taxpayer money, protected future victims. She handed me some papers. Under the False Claims Act, whistleblowers are entitled to a percentage of recovered funds. The government recovered over $14 million because of your evidence. You're entitled to 22%. I did the math in my head. over $3 million. My knees nearly gave out. The money arrived 2 months later. After lawyers and taxes, I netted just over $2 million. The first thing I did was pay off my student loans. $42,000? Gone. For the first time since graduate school, I had no debt. Then I bought a small house in New Hampshire. Nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, a yard, quiet neighborhood. But it was mine. No landlord, no eviction notices, stability. I set up an emergency fund. 6 months of expenses, untouchable. I would never be that vulnerable again. And I started job hunting. For real this time. The publicity from the trial had cleared my name completely. Media coverage framed me as the whistleblower who exposed massive fraud. Federal prosecutors publicly thanked me for my cooperation. My reputation wasn't just restored. It was enhanced. Job offers came quickly. Research institutions that wanted someone with my experience and integrity. Universities building compliance programs. Consulting firms. Advising on grant management. I accepted a position at Boston Children's Hospital as Director of Research Compliance, $95,000 a year. My role was to ensure accurate reporting, protect researchers from pressure to falsify data, and investigate any concerns about grant misconduct. I was doing exactly what I had tried to do at Westbrook. But now, I had the authority to actually fix problems. The pediatric diabetes grant was transferred to a new institution. With accurate patient numbers, ethical oversight, and proper management. They invited me to consult on the transition. Paid me $20,000 for 3 months of part-time work, helping them understand the research protocols. When the first paper from the study was published 2 years later, my name appeared in the acknowledgments. Original co-developer of research protocols, Dr. Evelyn Carson. It was the first time my work had been properly credited since before my termination. The research was helping children with diabetes, which had always been the point. Not the money, not the prestige, the science, the patients, making lives better. I started therapy to process everything that had happened. Weekly sessions with a psychologist who specialized in workplace trauma. The panic attacks slowly became less frequent. The nightmares faded. I learned to sleep again. Some relationships could be repaired, others couldn't. Amy reached out with an apology after the trial. I forgave her, but our friendship was never the same. She had abandoned me when I needed support most. That leaves scars. Other former colleagues who had thrown me under the bus tried to reconnect. I was selective about who I let back into my life. Trust, once broken, doesn't heal easily. I was invited to speak at an NIH conference on research integrity. The same conference center in Seattle, where I had been when the first fraudulent report was submitted. 300 researchers in the audience. I stood at that podium and told my story. Told them about 12 years of building a career. About being fired and blacklisted. About being homeless and facing federal prison for crimes I didn't commit. About documentation saving my life. I explained how they had underestimated me. Assumed I would give up. Thought no one would believe a fired employee over a prestigious institution. They were almost right. But they made one critical mistake. They underestimated what 12 years of research training teaches you. How to gather evidence. How to organize data. How to build an airtight case. My signature on that grant application almost destroyed me, I said. But that same signature, and the responsibility it represented, also saved me. Because I took that responsibility seriously. I kept records. I verified data. I questioned discrepancies. I did my job with integrity, even when pressured not to. I told them, document everything. Question inconsistencies. Stand up for accuracy, even when it's uncomfortable. Your signature means something. It's a legal and ethical commitment. And if you face retaliation for doing the right thing, don't stop documenting. The truth is powerful, but only if you can prove it. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. Several people were crying. Afterward, researchers approached me with their own stories. Workplace retaliation they had experienced. Pressure to falsify data. Concerns they didn't know how to report. I exchanged contact information. Became an informal mentor. Started getting invited to speak at other institutions. My nightmare was helping others avoid the same fate. 1 year after my termination, I sat in my home office in New Hampshire. Morning sunlight through the window. Coffee, in hand. Preparing a presentation on grant compliance for the hospital. An email notification appeared. NIH offering me a position on their National Advisory Board for Research Integrity, advising on policies to protect whistleblowers and prevent fraud. I accepted immediately. People ask if I regret not taking the plea deal. 18 months in prison versus a year of hell fighting for vindication. The answer is always no, because accepting guilt for something I didn't do wouldn't have been moving on. It would have been dying a slow death of the soul. I lost almost everything fighting for the truth. My career, my savings, my home, my reputation, relationships, my sense of safety. The panic attacks still come sometimes. Even now, I wake up at 3 in the morning convinced I'm back in that motel room facing prison. But I won the only thing that actually matters. Myself. My integrity. The knowledge that when they tried to break me, I refused to break. The federal government recovered $14 million because I wouldn't stay silent. 3 people who preyed on employees and stole from taxpayers are in federal prison. The research I cared about continues, ethically, helping children, and I have a career again. Better than before. Not despite what I survived, but because of it. I know what really matters now. I know who I am when everything is stripped away. They fired me thinking I was powerless. They forgot something crucial. Power isn't your title, or your paycheck, or your institution's reputation. Power is truth, documented and defended. Power is refusing to surrender your integrity when everything else is gone. My signature almost destroyed me. But in the end, it destroyed them instead. Because I stood behind what I signed. They didn't. That's the difference between guilt and innocence. Between justice and fraud. Between surviving and thriving. I met someone a year into my new job. Daniel, a researcher at the hospital. He noticed me in the cafeteria, reading through grant applications with notes spread across the table, offered to buy me coffee. We started talking. He was patient and kind when I explained why trust was hard for me, why I needed time, why I kept detailed records of everything, even casual conversations, because being meticulous had saved my life once and I couldn't stop. We took it slow. He understood. 2 years after the trial, we moved in together. A year after that, he proposed. I said yes. I have a life again, a real one, with a career I'm proud of, work that matters, people I trust, and hope for the future. They tried to destroy me. Instead, I rebuilt myself stronger. That's my story. That's how I survived and won. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to choose between staying silent or fighting for the truth, even when it seemed impossible to win? What would you do if you were in my position, watching your entire life collapse while being framed for something you didn't do? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, if it gave you hope that fighting back is possible, even when everything seems lost, please hit that like button. It helps others who might be facing similar situations find this story and know they're not alone. And consider subscribing to hear more stories about people who refused to give up, who fought impossible odds, who proved that integrity and truth still matter. There are so many stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things when their backs are against the wall. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe someone facing workplace retaliation. Maybe someone who feels powerless against a system designed to protect the powerful. Maybe someone who just needs a reminder that documentation and persistence can overcome even the most sophisticated lies. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for believing that truth matters. Thank you for being here. I hope you never face what I faced. But if you do, I hope my story gives you the strength to keep fighting, to keep documenting, to refuse to break. Stay strong, protect yourselves, and never underestimate the power of keeping good records. Take care of yourselves out there.